In a wealthy neighborhood in Bombay, British India, lived a middle-class Parsi family with French origin back in 1899. The Ruxton family produced a brilliant, smart boy named Buck Ruxton. Despite his high intelligence, he was less social than normal kids his age. And then he grew up to be a man who made his family proud. Dr. Ruxton, as they called him, was a well-known specialist in medicine, midwifery, and gynecology, a man of skill, of reputation, of trust, and then a man who murdered his wife. And there were eyewitnesses. In a remote Scottish ravine, a gruesome discovery sent shockwaves through the community. Scattered remains, carefully concealed, bore the marks of an unsettling precision, finding evidence of a mind both calculating and merciless. Authorities were left with more questions than answers. The faces were unrecognizable, fingerprints erased, and body parts scattered like a grotesque puzzle waiting to be solved. Who were the victims? Who was responsible for such a heinous act? And perhaps most disturbingly, what kind of person could do this? Each severed limb, each blood-stained clue, brought them closer to a chilling revelation, one that would shake the foundations of forensics. This was no ordinary crime. As investigators pieced together the fragments of a horrifying truth, they realized they were unraveling one of the most gruesome cases the world had ever seen. The deeper they dug, the more unsettling the reality became. What they uncovered would shock a nation and leave an unforgettable mark on the world of forensic science. This is the story of Buck Ruxton, the smart boy who would change the course of criminal investigation with a crime so heinous that it exposed the depths of human brutality. But before he became a cold-blooded murderer, Buck Ruxton was an ordinary son to a respectable family. Buck Ruxton was born in Bombay, British India, now called Mumbai, on 21st March 1899 into a wealthy middle-class family. His upbringing was respectable, and though he was a sensitive boy with few friends, he was highly intelligent. Early on, he set his sights on becoming a doctor. With his parents' financial support, he studied at the University of Bombay, earning his Bachelor of Medicine in 1922 and his Bachelor of Surgery in 1923. Shortly after, he secured a position at a Bombay hospital, specializing in medicine, midwifery, and gynecology. His ambitions did not stop there. On 29th of October, 1923, Ruxton was commissioned into the Indian Medical Service as a medical officer. He was sent to Basra, the city of great strategic importance under British control, where soldiers and civilians alike suffered from war wounds, infections, and the scorching heat of West Asia. The medical stations in Basra were overcrowded, and young doctors like Ruxton were expected to burn the midnight oil, treating cases of battle injuries, disease, and malnutrition. It was intense labor that he endured, making him a strong practitioner, but a human being lacking in empathy each passing day. Later, Ruxton was stationed in Baghdad, where he witnessed the brutal aftermath of war firsthand. Battlefield medicine was gruesome, and doctors were often forced to make split-second decisions that meant life or death. The constant exposure to suffering and death shaped him in ways that would become evident in the years to come. In October 1926, he gave up his commission, turning his back on military medicine and setting his sights on other opportunities. During this time, Ruxton entered into an arranged marriage with a Parsi woman named Modibai Jahangirji Gadiali in May 1925. However, the marriage did not work out. With financial assistance from his family and the Bombay Medical Service, Ruxton relocated to Britain in 1926. He attended medical courses at London's University College Hospital under the name Gabriel Hakim, before moving to Edinburgh in 1927 to begin studies towards obtaining a fellowship of the Royal Colleges of Surgeons. Although he failed his entrance examination, the General Medical Council authorized him to practice medicine in the United Kingdom based on his Bombay qualifications. Shortly thereafter, he legally changed his name via deed poll to Buck Ruxton. While studying in Edinburgh, Ruxton met a 26-year-old woman named Isabella Van Ness, who managed a cafe in the city. Isabella had been briefly married to a Dutchman in 1919, but the marriage had lasted for only weeks, and she had resumed using her maiden name, Kerr. The two slowly began liking each other and were soon a couple. Isabella accompanied Ruxton when he relocated to England in 1928. There he worked as a locum for a London doctor, Manek Motaphram, a fellow Parsi, before becoming an assistant to a Stepney-based doctor, B.R. Reigate. While the relocation was happening, Isabella was already pregnant with Ruxton's child. In 1929, Isabella gave birth to the couple's first child, a daughter they named Elizabeth. The family seemed stable, but behind the facade, Ruxton's aggressive nature and controlling behavior were becoming more evident. His jealousy and paranoia were slowly growing, and it was not long before he unleashed the monster within. Now the fits of anger and bouts of hysteria became routine in this house, where a home that Isabella made with love had turned into a hellhole for her. Their fights were so intense that police were called to their house multiple times, only for Isabella to return to him, after his desperate pleas and apologies. Isabella tried to escape. On several occasions, she packed her things and left for Edinburgh with her children, but Ruxton always managed to pull her back in, begging her to return, swearing his love, promising change while bending on his knees, his head down and tears rolling down his eyes. But nothing changed. In 1932, Isabella attempted to unalive herself. The method she used was gruesome. Gas asphyxiation was nearly fatal. She lost a pregnancy in the process. But even this did not end their relationship. She stayed, trapped in a cycle of violence and manipulation by a man who knew a way with his words. The police were familiar with the Ruxton household, having been called multiple times to settle their heated arguments. During one visit, Ruxton told an officer, "Sergeant, I feel like murdering two persons. My wife is going out to meet a man." In early September 1935, Isabella traveled to Edinburgh to visit her sister. She was accompanied by a prominent Lancaster family, the Edmondsons, who were close to the Ruxtons. Buck Ruxton did not go, staying behind due to his busy schedule as a doctor. But in his mind, this trip confirmed his worst suspicions. He was certain that Isabella was having an affair. He was even sure of the man she was having an affair with, Robert Edmondson, a young assistant editor in the local town hall. His jealousy consumed him, and by the time Isabella returned, Ruxton had already decided her fate. On the night of 14th September 1935, Isabella left to visit her sisters in Blackpool and see the Blackpool illuminations. She returned home late, around midnight. That night, Ruxton's paranoia and rage had taken the best of him. Confronting Isabella with allegations of infidelity that night, Ruxton lost control of himself. The sick assumption of his wife being a cheater left him in a fit of rage. Not knowing how to handle the monster that Ruxton had become, Isabella panicked, trying to run away. But it was too late. Blinded by fury, Ruxton attacked his wife. Perhaps it began with his hands closing around her throat, cutting off her breath, squeezing until her struggles weakened and her body slumped. Did she lose consciousness? Or did she die in that cruel, suffocating embrace? We may never know. But strangulation was not enough. His rage demanded more. He beat her, fists colliding with her delicate bones, shattering the bone structure of her face. And then came the blade, a cold, fatal finality, driving into her flesh, spilling her life onto the floor. He strangled, beat, and stabbed Isabella to death. But someone else had seen too much. Remember the eyewitness? She was murdered by the monster for the intention of eliminating every trace of his crime. Mary Jane Rogerson, their housemaid. Perhaps she heard the struggle and rushed in. Perhaps she was already there, her presence an unfortunate twist of fate. Perhaps she screamed. Perhaps she tried to run. But Ruxton could not let her live. Did she plead? Did she beg for her life? It didn't matter. His frenzied wrath turned to her with equal savagery. Blows rained down, the housemaid's skull fracturing beneath his fists. Maybe she cried out once. Maybe she had time to realize the horror of her fate before his hands found her throat. A desperate struggle. A body thrashing, fingers clawing at his skin, weakly grasping at nothing. Her final breath choked into silence. And then the knife again. Did he stab her to ensure she was dead? Or had he simply lost all control, his insatiable violence continuing long after her life had drained away? When it was over, when both women lay lifeless, their blood staining the floor, Ruxton stood amidst the carnage he had created. But his madness was not yet complete. Ruxton quickly set to work covering his tracks. Before the murders, he had told both of his charwomen not to come to the house until Monday, already ensuring no one would enter the home too soon and see the monstrosity he had committed that night. He had already killed Isabella and Mary Jane, but their suffering had not yet ended. The family, who once saw the intelligent boy making his mark in the most respectable field in India, would later be informed about the heinous ways their son used his knowledge. Ruxton used his medical expertise to dismember the bodies. Blood pooled in the house, staining the stairs and walls. He removed the carpet and burned towels in the garden to destroy evidence. The next day, he dropped his children off at a friend's home before returning to clean the crime scene. Later, he asked a patient and her husband to help him prepare for decorators, an excuse to explain the missing carpets and the mess in his home. When Mrs. Hampshire arrived at Dalton Square, she saw something was terribly wrong. Blood-stained carpet, a locked room with straw protruding from beneath the door, and a suit, Ruxton's suit, soaked in blood. He gave them stained stair carpeting and his suit, asking them to clean it. He thought he had covered his tracks, until a complete stranger discovers the horrors of his unfathomable crime. The morning of 29th September 1935 began like any other for Susan Haynes Johnson, a young woman walking near an old stone bridge nestled in the remote countryside, 2 miles or 3 kilometers north of Moffat, a quiet market town in Dumfriesshire, Scotland. The landscape was serene, the garden home Lynn stream flowing with grace beneath the bridge, its waters heavy from recent rains. Mist lingered over the hills, and the air was damp with the scent of earth and foliage. As she leaned over the parapet of the bridge to admire the view, soaking the misty air in, something caught her eye, a large misshapen bundle crammed against a boulder in the rushing water below. At first, she thought it might be an abandoned sack of clothing or discarded rubbish that swept down the stream. But something about the way it was caught on the rocks made her stomach churn. It did not feel right, and every fiber in her body was telling her to run away. But ignoring the cues of her body, Susan walked closer to the sack. The fabric, darkened by water, clung tightly to its contents, revealing unsettling contours of a human body. Then, a grotesque detail sent a jolt of horror through her body. A human arm, bloated and partially decomposed, protruded from the fabric, fingers curling unnaturally, as if reaching for something that Susan could not see. Susan gasped, stumbling back from the parapet, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. She could not tear her gaze away from the limp, lifeless limb, the exposed flesh gray and rotting, slashed with nauseating precision. A chill crawled up her spine. Someone had mutilated this body in the most disrespectful way possible. Her scream teared through the morning stillness. What started as a pleasant morning turned into an unforgettable one, a day that will haunt Susan forever in her dreams. The gruesome discoveries at Garden Home Lynn sent shockwaves through Scotland. The Dumfriesshire Constabulary, faced with a crime of unprecedented brutality, knew they needed specialized expertise. Detective officers from Glasgow were immediately summoned, and by the following day, Detective Lieutenant William Ewing and Detective Lieutenant Bertie Hammond arrived in Moffat. What they found was nothing short of a nightmare. The bodies were mangled, severed, and stripped of nearly every identifying feature, which presented an immediate challenge. Even determining their sex was difficult due to the extensive disfigurement. The killer had left nothing to chance, making sure that traditional methods of identification, such as dental records or fingerprints, were either impossible or severely compromised. But killers always make mistakes. While reviewing the case in Dumfries, Detective Ewing happened upon a newspaper report detailing the recent disappearance of 2 women from Lancaster, England. Something about the description stopped him cold. One of the missing women bore a remarkable similarity, at least in height and build, to one of the butchered victims found in the Annan River. Ewing's instincts told him there was a connection, so he decided to follow his instincts, and soon the evidence began mounting. Amid the bloody ruins of the corpses, a single piece of newspaper would prove to be one of the most disturbing clues. The victims had been wrapped in editions of the Sunday Graphic, a national publication. On the surface, this meant little until detectives discovered something crucial. This specific edition of the Sunday Graphic had only been distributed in the Lancaster district. The trail of horror was beginning to lead away from Moffat and into England. Another glaring detail sent chills down the spine of the investigators. The manner in which the bodies had been dismembered was unlike any ordinary murder. This was no haphazard act of rage. Instead, the precise incisions, the calculated removal of identifying features, and the total destruction of distinguishing marks all pointed to one irrefutable fact. The murderer had an expert knowledge of human anatomy. This was not the work of a mere criminal. This was the work of a highly skilled surgeon. As detectives dug deeper into the Lancaster disappearances, 2 names surfaced. Number 1 was Mrs. Isabella Ruxton, the wife of a prominent physician, Dr. Buck Ruxton, and the second was Mary Rogerson, Isabella's maid, who had vanished alongside her employer. The connection was too strong to ignore. Ruxton's wife and maid had disappeared, and 2 mutilated bodies had been found hundreds of miles away. Detectives turned their attention toward Dr. Buck Ruxton, a man known famously for his precision. Rumors had already swirled about his volatile temper and his obsessive jealousy toward his wife. Now, with 2 unclaimed bodies and his wife missing, the police had good reason to suspect him. It was time to pay him a visit. Dr. Buck Ruxton was soon arrested, and with his detention, the police were given unrestricted access to his house in Dalton Square, Lancaster. What they found inside confirmed their worst fears. The bathroom, once a place of cleanliness and somewhat luxury, bore the unmistakable scars of murder. Bloodstains, some still visible, others desperately scrubbed away, covered the stair carpet and the floors. The scene reeked of a failed cover-up, the murderer's attempt to wash away his sins, proving futile under the scrutiny of forensic science. But a body is more than just flesh and blood. It touches things, it leaves marks, and it was fingerprints that would finally seal Ruxton's fate. The forensic team knew that if they could match a fingerprint from the bodies to any print inside the house, it would prove beyond doubt that at least one of the victims had once lived there. But there was a problem. Only one set of fingertips remained intact, those belonging to the maid, Mary Rogerson. The other set, belonging to Isabella Ruxton, had been severed and were never recovered. The killer had made sure that his wife's hands would never betray him, even if she had betrayed him in his sick mind. But he had underestimated the tenacity of science. Detective Bertie Hammond and Detective Sergeant Duncan meticulously combed through the house, examining every possible surface. From the lampshades in the attic to the medicine bottles in the basement, nothing was left untouched. Every cup, saucer, bottle, and dish was dusted, and hundreds of fingerprints emerged. Then, in the bathroom, they found the one that mattered most, a clear palm print on the door. This print would later be forensically matched to the dead hands of Mary Rogerson. She had been here. She had died here. And so had Isabella Ruxton. The final nail in Buck Ruxton's coffin came from Professor John Glaister, the forensic scientist leading the post-mortem examination. With Ruxton's wife horrifically disfigured, traditional identification was nearly impossible. But Glaister had another trick up his sleeve. Using X-ray imaging, he superimposed radiographs of Isabella Ruxton's skull over old photographs of her taken when she was alive and well. The shape of the skull, the jawline, and the bone structure all aligned perfectly. There was no longer any doubt. The butchered remains pulled from the river were those of Isabella Ruxton and Mary Rogerson, and their murderer was Dr. Buck Ruxton. The case of Dr. Ruxton would go on to become one of the most groundbreaking murder investigations in British history. It was a case of science versus savagery, where forensic innovation won over the butchery of a distasteful man. Dr. Buck Ruxton had believed himself untouchable, a man so meticulous in dismembering his victims that he thought no one could ever piece them back together. But he was wrong. The river had not carried away his sins. The newspapers had not hidden his crime. And the fingerprints of the dead had spoken louder than any defense he could muster. A doctor who once saved lives was now condemned to die. On March 2, 1936, the trial of Dr. Buck Ruxton commenced at Manchester's High Court of Justice. He was charged with the murders of his wife, Isabella Ruxton, and their housemaid, Mary Jane Rogerson. The case had drawn widespread attention due to the gruesome nature of the crimes and the forensic techniques used to identify the victims. Ruxton pleaded not guilty, but the prosecution built a strong case against him, supported by forensic evidence and witness testimonies. The prosecution, led by Joseph Cooksey Jackson, K.C., argued that Ruxton's motive was rooted in jealousy. Following the murders, Ruxton attempted to conceal his crimes by meticulously dismembering the bodies. The remains were then transported over 100 miles from Lancaster to Scotland, where they were disposed of in a remote ravine near the River Lynn. He took extensive measures to prevent identification, including mutilating facial features and removing fingertips. Ruxton's defense, led by Norman Burkett, K.C., attempted to cast doubt on the identification of the bodies and suggested alternative explanations for the presence of bloodstains in his home. The defense argued that the forensic evidence was circumstantial and did not definitively link Ruxton to the crime. However, forensic experts had successfully linked the fabric used to wrap the bodies to materials found in Ruxton's home, and the blood patterns matched those of the victims. Additionally, Ruxton's erratic behavior following the discovery of the remains, including providing conflicting accounts of his wife's whereabouts, further undermined his defense. After a trial that lasted 11 days, the jury deliberated for just over an hour before returning a guilty verdict. Dr. Buck Ruxton was found guilty of double murder, and on 12 May 1936, he was set to be hanged at H.M. Prison, Manchester. A final twist emerged after Ruxton's execution, when a sealed letter he had written shortly after his arrest was made public. The letter wrote, "I killed Mrs. Ruxton in a fit of temper because I thought she had been with a man. I was mad at the time. Mary Jane Rogerson was present at the time. I had to kill her." This confession removed any lingering doubts about his sentence. It was confirmed that he had indeed not only murdered those people, but had their bodies dismembered. However, why he decided to commit such horrors to a human body remains a mystery to this day. Now I want to hear your thoughts. Do you think the death penalty was the right punishment for him, or should he have spent the rest of his life in prison with no way out? Drop your opinions in the comments. If you like the way we create these videos, and you want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.